Hey, what's up, guys? Node Investor here, bringing a quick update on Bitcoin and Ethereum as some of these charts are starting to show some selling pressure showing up here as we enter the new week. So I want to point out a couple of levels to be watching here near term, both looking at the bull case as well as the bear case, which right now the trend, the momentum absolutely favors the bearish case. And so want to be clear about that. We'll take a look at those charts here. But first, let's take a quick look at the coin market cap. So the cryptocurrency market cap stands right around $210 billion. Should Bitcoin break below 6K, that will absolutely send it below that $200 billion mark. But you can see here over the last couple of months that BTC dominance continues to rise, and it's going up pretty sharply here, now over that 50% mark, sitting at almost 52%. And that is very largely due to the fact that some of the big cap names are sliding significantly versus BTC. Some of the names that carry the most counterweight on the dominance, such as Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, you've seen the slides on those being pretty significant. They continue to look weak versus BTC, and so we're seeing the BTC dominance rise, but for the most part, the altcoin market is still very weak, very bearish, but we are absolutely hitting some oversold levels, some extremes to the downside. But a lot ultimately is going to depend on what Bitcoin does this week. So right now, the big number that everyone's watching is that 6K number. So let's go take a look at the charts. So looking at BTC here over the last couple of days, you can see here we had this big sell-off here for a couple of weeks, and going into the weekend here, we found some support right around that 6,000 mark, just above it. I went live. I had just posted a video, and I did a live stream last Friday going into the weekend, and at the time we were watching the prices to see if they would hold above 6K. Clearly they did going into the weekend, but for now, all it was a bounce off of this support level. You can see we had a bounce. We had a small rally going into the 10 EMA on that daily chart here. And for the most part, it was just a no trade weekend for me. It was very choppy, very sideways. I had closed out the shorts once I started to see some support here. And closing out the shorts when you trade doesn't necessarily mean you automatically go long. It's the same at the top. If you're long on a trend and you start to see sell signals, that doesn't necessarily mean go short at the top, because it could just as easily consolidate and break higher. But if there are sell signals, then it means sometimes close out the longs or raise the stops or take profits. Same on the short side. We started to see some buying action, some support showing up, and so that was the early signal to get out of the way from a short selling perspective and see how this plays out. And so zooming in a little bit here, you can see on the 4-hour chart, we had this low established, then we had a new lower low, and for now, that's all it's been, is a lower low and a lower high. And so we've not been able to break that pattern yet. You can see on the bigger time frames that the charts are still below the shorter term moving average, the 10 EMA. But there's a couple of things to keep an eye on here. There's two patterns that I'm watching here. Clearly, this bounce with lower volume was bearish. Right now, we're making a little bit of a bearish reversal pattern here on the 4-hour chart with this most recent candle showing some big sell-off attempt, but we are still technically holding this little bit of a trend that it's rising. There's two things that I'm looking at here. The RSI has cooled off enough, and so if prices want to continue lower, they absolutely can. And so the level to be watching on the downside is going to be a retest of this most recent support just above 6K. A break below that, and we can see a pretty quick move down to 5,800 at least. And so that's what I'm going to be watching. Now, if we continue lower and make a higher low, then you're going to start to see the makings of a pretty decent inverse head and shoulder pattern here on the 4-hour charts. Up until now, there hasn't really been much of a pattern. In fact, the pattern that I've been watching here is really just been a bull pennant, or a bear pennant, excuse me, within the broader spectrum here on this downtrend. You see this just kind of tightening up, getting very narrow here, and that's really what I've been watching. But if we make a pretty decent low here, but closing above the recent lows at 6K, then that'll form a pretty decent inverse head and shoulder pattern. It'll give you a good case to continue to look at the same relative resistance zone, which is right now right around 6,500. So a close above 6,500 will begin to signal that maybe that was a good low and prices want to bounce a little bit higher. we are still relatively oversold to the extreme on the downside, and so I'm being aware of that. But the RSI is trying to hold here at the 30s, but it could absolutely go lower. We've seen it go lower. Looking at Ethereum, it's the same case. You can see Ethereum here on the downside is very oversold. I mean, the daily chart on the RSI is hitting here in the low 20s, and so I was filled on another short entry here as it broke lower, but I'm keeping a tight stop, and I'm just going to be trailing it all the way down just because prices are here. Let me clear this. That's definitely not my stop that high, but prices are absolutely extremely oversold, but there is no sign of strength yet either. So looking at this first level of support that broke down right around that 312, 313, and now we're seeing confirmation by a break below the recent lows, so it's now making a lower low, and you can see how weak it's been relative to BTC during this little pause, this little a rally attempt, bounce, whatever we want to call it, off the lows over the weekend. It couldn't even close above the 10 EMA on that 4-hour chart, so it is absolutely weak versus BTC here, but it's very oversold and extremely stretched to the downside on the daily, and so you got to be cautious from that perspective. It could just as quickly turn around to the upside. Looking at ETH versus BTC, you can see just how weak it is relatively speaking, and just continues to slide lower. Looking at the big picture on the daily, I was talking about this key support level that broke down versus Bitcoin here last weekend, and that's continued to slide lower. And right now, it's kind of a no man's land now here from a support perspective. You can see now that it's broken down below that key support zone, right around that 0.053 level. It's just kind of entering this no man land. We have had this long rally here that was the last big push here, so it's broken support, and right now the next level down is really where it's at right now if it needs to bounce. But for now, it's definitely the weaker of the two, and so I've been favoring this one from a short side perspective, but because it is getting pretty stretched to the downside, I'm playing it a lot more cautiously and looking at BTC now. So going back to Bitcoin, I'll go to BTC here on Coinbase. Some of the levels to keep an eye on here, obviously, if we break below the most recent lows here, then the next big level is going to be that 5,800 low that we saw, or in and around there, the most recent lows that we saw end of June, early July. And that's going to be the key level that everyone's watching here. A break below that will likely send prices down to the low mid 5K level. We've been talking about that as being the next big base that was formed here late last year. And so you can see that that's really the next big support level if prices continue to break down here. And so while they are a little bit overstretched to the downside, the momentum is still clearly in favor of the bears. There's not been any real strong signs of the bulls showing up just yet. You can see it on the daily chart. The bounce volume has been relatively weak. And so we had a pretty good attempt this weekend for the bulls to show up here. There was a little bit of strong reversal action. Absolutely, it was short covering rally off the lows. You saw a little attempt here, then you saw a big pop here where prices very quickly went from around 6,100 up to about 6,500 before pausing. But that's not unusual when there is such a high short interest. Once things break above certain resistance levels, you see the shorts buying as well as new buyers coming in to buy off the lows. And so you get those quick spikes to the upside, and we could just very well see something like that happen here if Bitcoin continues to hold at these levels around 63. If you break above that 6,500 level, then I expect we'll see another short covering rally to the upside, and the level to be watching there, next level up, it's going to be around that 6,900 and then 7K psychological number as your first real key resistance level. So that's going to be it for now, guys. Just wanted to bring that updates going into the week as these markets continue to develop. We will likely be doing another live stream here tomorrow, so look out for that. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate you being here. Until next time, happy trading.